So hello and welcome back. Excuse me. Today we're going to do another JavaScript tutorial. We're going to talk about functions. So before function, I want to talk about briefly on scope. Okay. So I feel like I do skip the scope part. So basically scope is defined as in what area or what kind of function, what kind of loop what kind of region that you can use a variable, that a variable is defined to you. For example, let I equals 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. For let j equals 0, j less than 5, j plus plus. Alright, so in this loop, what I want to do is see, do I have, so in this nested for loop, I want to see, do we have access to I in this nested loop? So what I can say is console.log I. And indeed, you can see there's no error message popping up, which means in the nested loop, we do have access to I. So since j is defined within that for loop, we don't really need to think about that. Alright, so here's the interesting part. I want to define to see if j is be able to use in the first loop. So I can say console.log j. And if you press enter now, you're going to say, see, j is not defined, but wait, j is defined right here. That is where the scope comes in. So there's two explanations to explain this. First is you didn't define it, since it's execute line by line. When it's reached here, still not defined yet. Second is because of scope. This j is only available in this for loop, nowhere else. So even if I paste it here, I do absolutely nothing about it. Here's the best way to show the slope. And you want to console.log I. You will see I is not defined because it's defined only in that for loop, where you can also try j, which is also not defined because it's not in the nested loop. So usually JavaScript only has two scopes called local and global. Global scope is granted to the loop that is inside of a loop. So you can use a variable that is in the first loop and in the second loop, and a function that is inside of a function. We're going to talk about second statement today. Alright, so we look at nested loop. Let's take a look on nested function. So suppose I have a function called mass. Let's take a number a and b. And in here, I'm going to say another function is called add. We just do simply just return and add these two numbers together. And as a result of this mass function, we're going to return a times b plus a add a comma b. Alright, so good. So we don't have any errors. Now if we try to call mass, you can see, say 1020, I got 230. To check the value is true, we can say, okay, so first we'll multiply these two numbers. So 10 times 20 is 200, and add to go back to here, which is taking parameter 10 and 20 and add them together. So this is just simply a nested loop. Nested function. And actually, we can simplify this down. So we don't really need this. We can just say a plus b. So we still have no error. Let's try that again. 1020. And you can still see 30. That's because according to the scope, this variable, these two parameter, or in this case, no, it's still a variable, is granted to the function that is inside a function. So this function can ultimately use it. Actually, there's no point to provide this. So let's try that again. And yes, so there's no point to provide this. It's according to the scope. This part is always available in here. So we can use this this parameter in this nested function. All right. So we briefly talk about scope and nested function. We're going to talk about a really powerful concept. It's called closure. It's actually another programming language's name, but we're going to focus on closure in JavaScript. So closure is an expression or a function, most likely. It's going to have three variables together with an environment that binds those variables together. We're close as an expression according to MDN documentation. It's really complicated. It's still a lot of big word, but we're going to break it down and to see what does that mean. So, example number 1 is I have a function called outside, which takes a parameter of x, and then we have a function called inside, which takes a parameter of y. So, in this, I'm going to return x plus y. Notice that I can use x, just like I can use a and b in this case. And then I'm going to return inside. Alright, so now we'll look at this. You can see why this inside does not have function. Well, that's because the magic of closure. You don't need to have a function when it's nested function, I believe. So, such as return inside, you don't need to have parentheses around it. You can just type inside, just like how it's how dealing with a variable. So, to call this function, we can use outside 10. Alright, now this is even more magical. What is this? Well, it actually gives us a function back. So that's exactly what we're doing here. We are not trying to get a function result, which is return a function value. Just like you do it in the Python, if you have prior experience with Python before, this is give you the function. So we can now use this function to provide, such as we can give a variable. Let's just call it outside var. So this is our function. We can use this, and then in that, we can go ahead and call a y value. You can see it says f of y, which means okay. So now this is a function. Now you can go ahead and give me a y value, which I'm going to say 5, and it's 15, which adds a 10 and a 5 together. So that's the magic of closure, where you can also use this multiple parentheses to get the inside function. So the ultimately what actually return is this line. This line gives you a function, which is important because it directs you to this line. But then this will give you the actual result, such as 15 back. Alright. Now let's look at another example. So for example, we have function once, taking a parameter of x. Function twice, taking no parameter. We're going to return x. Then going to return twice. Alright. So what do you think would happen? So what do you think would happen if I substitute x value here? It's actually a spoiler alert since I already did it. You will actually get the x value back. So whenever you plug the value here, even a string, get it back. Why? Because here's our function. When you get the x, it actually works really similar to this, except it's actually going to return a function, return a result, not a function. So what's happening is, here is our function. The first function. Then when it's execute here, okay, so I declare a new function, but I don't know how to do that since it does not call yet. Let's say going to return the value of the twice function. So now, okay, let's go back and execute this line. So we're gonna say, okay, so function twice, which is taking no parameter, but just return the x value. So it's going to just return this parameter value back to you. Now you can see closure can be really complicated sometimes. It does have some complicated example in the MDN documentation. If you want, you can take a look. I'm probably going to link it to the. Oh, sorry about that. Probably going to link down into the description below. Now I'm going to introduce you to an error called name conflict. Oh, sorry, did I spell conflict wrong? That's how I say. Name conflict. So, alright, so suppose we have a function called outside. By the way, these are all really not good function naming convention, because it doesn't really tell you what to do, so make sure you name it better, but since it's just a tutorial. So, then we are going to go ahead and declare a variable. Just say x got 5, which is a bad variable name, but function inside, we call x. Here, we're going to go ahead and return x times 2. And then we're going to return inside. Okay, so probably you say, okay, it's just like regular old data because you didn't really read it. So let me talk about what's supposed this function to do. This function is supposed to return the value that's multiplied by the x by 2. So multiply this by 2. Okay. So basically it should return 10. But when you type this in, call this, you get 20. Why do you get 20? Well, let's look down in this code bit by bit, and I'm trying to use rubber duck debugging. So, the way we should get 10 is like, okay, 5 times 2, it should be 10. But what is actually happening is, okay, so the first thing is, you'll get this function. Just like what we did here, you get a function first. In this function, it's actually going to take a parameter called 10. Then it's going to multiply by, oh, excuse me. Oh. Don't know what happened. Oh, shoot. Did it all clear? Okay. No worry. Let me just type it again. It's actually really good since we can get things clear a little bit. So this is just same code. So just return a function back to you. And then here's what we're going to do. Well, I get 20. So first we still have the variable, right? Let me just copy just in case get lost again. So we have a variable called 5. Now we're just going to return a inside variable. So I mean inside function. Closure is a little bit confusing. So we're going to return a function here. So what actually happened is you are calling the inside function 10. So now you're actually substituting a new parameter here. Notice that how the parameter is same as x. And now parameter 10 times 2. So instead of 5 times 2 is 10 times 2. This is called naming conflict, which means when inner function has the same variable as outer function in this case, when inner function has the same parameter, then the variable and same as the variable declared in the outer function. So to solve that, we can simply to replace any of the variable, then that will solve the issue. The last thing we're going to talk about in this tutorial is what we called a new syntax called arrow function, which is a fast way to write function if you hate type function, blah blah blah, blah blah, parenthesis, all this code. If you hate to type that, what you can do now is such as you can give a variable name. So such you can say function name equal to parenthesis, then use arrow key to show console.log hello world. For example, that's what my code is going to do. So what is this compared to this? So ultimately, this thing is same as function block, this part. So const function name is instead of straight give you a function, it's actually substitute as a variable. Now here's what happened. Here is actual arrow function. So you can see there's parenthesis for parameter if you want to substitute any parameter in. And then you use an arrow which is equal and greater than sign. Then use bracket, type console.log hello world. Although I don't really using arrow function a lot since I'm still a standard person. But if we just call function name, and indeed you will see hello world print out into our console. Alright, so that's all we're going to talk about for today's tutorial. We talk about scope, which recall we have two scopes in JavaScript, local and global, nested function, closure, and arrow function. I'm going to link all the documentation down below to the description. And yep, thank you for watching this video.